Welcome back. Well, it's thought that the US has the highest gun ownership per capita in the world. 90% of American citizens are armed, according to some statistics. A study from Switzerland late last year ranked Yemen and Finland just beneath the US for gun ownership. But the Geneva-based Small Arms Survey also says that gun ownership does not necessarily lead to gun crime. Finland allows gun possession, it says, with few restrictions, while gun crime remains low. But the survey also claims that there are 100 million guns across the Middle East in civilian hands. Another finding is that only 12% of all guns worldwide are registered with authorities. Well, in gun-happy USA, weapons are also, of course, a business. The National Rifle Association, or the NRA, is one of the most influential lobbying groups in the United States. Well, they even grade presidential candidates. And gun control is an issue that traditionally differentiates the two major political parties in the U.S. The two Democrats competing for their party's presidential nomination, for example, they have pretty similar stands on gun control. Both of them receive failing grades from the NRA. Hillary Clinton said she wants gun laws that allow law-abiding citizens to own guns but keep the weapons out of the hands of criminals. Well, Barack Obama, on the other hand, also supports greater gun control and, like Clinton, advocates a ban on assault weapons. He also wants to see stricter background checks before buyers purchase a gun. Well, on the other side of the fence, Republican candidate John McCain opposes gun control and reinstating a ban on assault weapons. McCain, though, barely passes the NRA test, though, getting a C. Well, joining us again, our guests in Washington, D.C., Sebastian Sassi, and in London, Rebecca Peters. Thank you both for being with us. If I could start with Rebecca, and the question, do fewer guns in a society really mean less gun crimes?
Well, in general, that is true, but I suppose if I could rephrase the expression a bit, it's the question of the number of guns, the types of guns, and also how they are distributed in society. For example, in the US, there are about 90 guns for every 100 residents. That doesn't mean 90% of people have guns. It means that's a statement about the number of guns. In fact, in the US, about between 30 and 40% of households contain a gun, and that is a very high, that is pretty much the highest level of gun ownership in the world. And in general, if you take those factors into account, we can see a pattern across the world that the more easily available, especially handguns are, especially in situations of, for example, high urbanization and of inequality, then yes, you do get more gun violence. I'm sorry, it's not a very easy little definition, but...
Right, how does that explain the situation that exists in Finland, where apparently it's very easy to get guns and yet there's very low gun crime? Is that about the type of gun that's available?
It is, exactly. So in Finland has a very strong tradition of hunting, and it's very common in Finland for people to own hunting weapons. Also, the people who own those weapons live in rural areas, which are areas which inherently have less crime. What is not so easily available in Finland is handguns, and it's handguns which account for the vast majority of gun violence in the US. The other thing, of course, is that Finland does have relatively high rates of gun violence compared with other countries in Europe. But of course, it's nothing like what we see in the United States.
All right, let's take some of those points over to Sebastian. Would you agree that at least perhaps a ban on some type of weapons is acceptable? I mean, do people need access to every type of gun under the sun?
You're asking the wrong question. The question is, what is the point of the ban? The criminals aren't going to obey the ban, so it's kind of a silly question. Preventing me from having a handgun or a rifle isn't going to prevent a criminal from having one.
But there is a question, forgive me for interrupting, but I mean, isn't there a question about why an individual would need an automatic assault weapon?
Well, first of all, automatic weapons, and I'm sure Ms. Peters hasn't made this distinction, but automatic weapons are already tightly regulated by the National Firearms Act of 1934. For you to possess one of those in the United States, you have to have a very extensive background check at the federal level. The BATF is going to really examine you very thoroughly before you're allowed to buy one of these weapons, and you have to pay for a very expensive tax stamp to buy one of those weapons. So that's the first point I would like to make, is those sorts of weapons are not readily available to the public. Secondly, you're asking the wrong question again. The point is not need. It's not whether I have a need for anything. I don't need a big screen TV. I don't need an RV. I don't need a car. I don't need a vacation. What you need is food and water. It's not a question of need. It's a question of rights. Do you have the right to defend yourself? The most useful tool for defending yourself from unexpected attack from a violent criminal is, guess what? A handgun. That's why police officers carry them.
All right, Rebecca, once again, can guns be compared to some of the other commodities, as Sebastian was comparing them to? Televisions?
No, a gun is not the same as a widescreen TV. You know, if you bring a widescreen TV into the house, that does not endanger the lives of other residents of your household or, in fact, of other members of the community. The point about a gun, and specifically a handgun, handguns are a product made for killing people. That is their purpose, and they're very good at performing that purpose. But it's not a product like any other, and it needs to be controlled much, much more strictly. So yes, it should be. I mean, and I suppose this is a cultural difference, which I guess we'll get to, between the US and other countries. Other developed countries don't agree that ordinary citizens in peacetime, in the course of their everyday life, should be equipped to kill another citizen.
All right, Sebastian, is the problem perhaps that there is the fact that people in the US see the handgun or the assault weapon as another commodity, as a widescreen television? There's so much business and power and money muscle behind it that it's become a normal commodity.
It's hardly a normal commodity. I don't have to have a 14-day waiting period to buy a car. I don't have to get a background check to buy a TV. What Rebecca's ignoring is the fact that we already have 20,000 laws at the federal level that govern the purchase of handguns across the United States. Those laws are already enforced across the board. So I don't understand what she's getting at. Of course, nobody's trying to say that a gun is the same as any other form of commodity. What I'm saying is that need isn't part of the question. The equation has nothing to do with need. It's not about whether you need to have this. Do you have the right to own it or not? Or actually, really, does the government have the power to tell you that you shouldn't have it? And that's really, I think, what is at the core of the case today. So I think I'm obviously not trying to say that a gun is the same kind of commodity as a TV or a car. The point I'm trying to make is that exactly what she's saying, which is that guns are already strictly regulated. So I think what she's asking for already exists. We already have the strictest gun control laws that I can imagine. At the federal level, there's a phone book thick size stack of regulations for who can possess, who can sell, who can own firearms. So I don't think the state of affairs that she's looking for doesn't already exist.
All right, Sebastian, let me put the question this way. I mean, looking at how much of a business concern the weapons industry has become, can you really have a balanced political debate when one side spends more than 10 times more than the other side in funding political candidates?
You know why the other side doesn't have the money that our side has? It's because there are 4 million individuals like me who belong to the National Rifle Association. There are 30 or 40 million gun owners who consider themselves active in supporting the political freedom that we enjoy, the right to keep and bear arms. So there are so many people in the United States who firmly believe, as I do, that you should have the right to defend yourself and that you should have the personal freedom to own firearms. That's why the gun lobby, the evil gun lobby, is so powerful. It's not because there's an evil wizard pulling the strings. It's because we outnumber the other side by so much.
All right.
We are the majority opinion.
All right. Rebecca, perhaps the situation in America is so different from the rest of the world that people really feel that they need the right to carry weapons. Could it be explained away in cultural, historical differences?
Well, I mean, if there are 4 million members of the National Rifle Association, so that means that around 95% of Americans do not belong to the National Rifle Association. And that's important to remember, that the National Rifle Association, or the extremist pro-gun lobby, represents, it's an extremely vocal, it's extremely wealthy, but it is only 4 million people in a population of 300 million. So it isn't representative of Americans as a whole. But that's for Americans to realize, I suppose. The thing is that and also, most Americans don't see guns as an ideological issue. It's this very small group who see it as for whom it's a political and ideological matter, and for whom it's the most important thing in the world. And I suppose, and that is a cultural difference, both between those members, those extremist gun owners in the US and the rest of the US, but also between the US and other countries. And it's true that in other developed countries, people have much more confidence in their governments. You see that not just in questions like gun ownership, but also we have, public health systems, public education systems, which work much better.
All right, I do want to jump in. I'm sorry, I'm trying. We've got a brief minute left, so I want to give an opportunity to Sebastian. You were mentioning there the NRA. Let's look at some of the gradings. They've given, of course, Obama and Clinton an F rating, but even McCain gets a C. Just how representative of the majority you were talking about are lobbies like the NRA?
Oh, absolutely. If you poll the American people, close to 70% of the American people agree that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms. That's a bigger plurality than you'll find on any other political issue. You'll never get 70% of Americans to agree on anything.
None of the popular politicians get a decent rating from the NRA. I mean, what have you got to do as a politician to get an A rating, for example?
You have to respect the individual right to keep and bear arms. John McCain has repeatedly voted with the gun control side in the past. Now, he's made a lot of statements, and I think this is something that Mrs. Peters, if she's trying to suggest that our view is the minority viewpoint, I think she should address why is it that if my viewpoint is such a small viewpoint, then why is the anti-gun side so much smaller? If they're 10 times smaller than me,
I'm afraid
I think that's an important point.
Okay, you've made your point. We're going to have to thank our guests and leave it there because I'm afraid we are out of time. In Washington, D.C., Sebastian Sassy, and in London, Rebecca Peters. Thank you both for joining us here. And thank you for joining us here in this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. For now, it's goodbye.